Hi, thanks for tuning in. I'm George Fontes. My firm, Fontes Advisors, is a New York City-based government affairs consulting firm. What we are here to talk about today is Pulse of the Primary, which is a series of 3 polls that we'll be doing over the course of the New York City primary this year, 2021. So, the 2021 New York City mayor's race will be a pivotal event in the city's history. And given the overwhelming majority of registered Democrats, whoever wins the primaries is almost guaranteed to win the general election in November. And first and foremost, the new mayor will have their hands full as the city begins to recover from the pandemic and the resulting economic devastation. There's a renewed spotlight on crime, racial justice, economy, quality of life, just to name a few. And the new mayor will have no shortage of challenges to overcome. Additionally, the city is facing what we call a leadership cliff. Between now and the end of the year, 80% of the city's elected officials are going to turn over. That's a new mayor, a new comptroller, 4 new borough presidents, 36 new city council members, including a new speaker of the city council, along with a vast majority of their staff, which means it's a tremendous loss of institutional knowledge and experience. Knowing that these issues were important and that we wanted to be more knowledgeable for our clients, my firm retained Core Decision Analytics, which is a national opinion research firm. Their president, Adam Rosenblatt, is joining us today to help us present some of the findings of our poll. We knew that there'd be a great deal of attention paid to this critical election, though, and we realized that nowadays there's little to no quality public polling that gets released. So instead of just keeping Pulse of the Primary to ourselves, we developed this idea and we decided to release it to the general public. These polls are a series of independent polls. They're not affiliated with any political campaigns, and they're designed, again, just to give the public some additional insight as we head towards the primary election day.
Thanks, George. So I'll pick it up from here and talk a little bit about what we did and what we'll walk through in this presentation. So the methodology, we'll cover exactly what this first Pulse of the Primary survey was. We'll take a look at some of the issues that we explored within the survey, the mayor's race, of course, and ranked choice voting. And then we'll get to some concluding thoughts. So in terms of the methodology, Core Decision Analytics conducted 842 online interviews, a quantitative survey among New York City Democratic primary likely voters. And it was conducted from January 20th through the 25th of this year, 2021, just after the inauguration. By definition, all the likely voters had to currently live in one of the 5 boroughs, had to be a registered Democrat, and say they will definitely or probably vote in the June primary election for New York City mayor and other elected offices. And the overall margin of error is 3.38 at the 95% confidence interval. So now George will talk a little bit about the issues that we explored within this first survey.
Thanks. So what you're going to start to see is that COVID has laid bare the gap between those of means and those whose means are limited. You can see here more than half of likely voters experienced economic harm due to COVID. 57% of likely voters agree that the pandemic caused a significant impact on my household finances. That's not shocking to hear that COVID had a negative impact on so many. But notice the intensity here. We have 26% of people who strongly agree with that statement. But let's take it one level deeper and see where we go. Here you can start to see COVID really begins to put a spotlight on the haves and have-nots in New York City. Incredibly, 72% of likely voters agree. People who temporarily left New York City during the peak of the pandemic had access to resources and abilities not available to most typical New Yorkers. But then we wanted to go one level deeper from that and see where we ended up. And here, nearly half of likely voters ponder leaving the 5 boroughs, but economic reality restricts this for most. 47% of likely voters agree, if I had the ability, I would consider moving out of New York City permanently. It seems like people are asking themselves, what's so great about New York? Now, we know from the New York Times report in May of 2020 that they found, using cell phone data, that 420,000 people had left New York City between March 1st and May 1st. Now, those are only 2 months, and right when the peak of the pandemic was really heating up. Certainly, a lot of those people came back. What we don't know is how many decided to stay wherever they were, in their second homes or wherever they may have gone. Now, we also know that since 2017, the city's been losing population by about 50,000 people per year. But it would seem pretty clear that these temporary departures obviously enhance that. But it's very likely, anecdotally from what we know, that that 50,000 person per year decline will have increased in 2020. Now, we're going to roll to the next slide. And what you can see here is the question we asked in the box. Which of the following issues is most important to you when considering the candidates running in the Democratic primary for mayor? Preventing the spread of COVID and opening the economy are effectively two sides of the same coin. They're indisputably linked. And together, they add up to nearly 50%. It's overwhelmingly the issue of highest concern to most likely New Yorker, not New Yorkers, voters, when they think about their choice for mayor. But you can see a lot of other issues on this slide too. And to be clear, it's not that those issues don't matter to likely voters. It's just that to most people, they're not the most important when considering the next mayor. For example, crime and public safety rates fairly high here, almost almost the same as reopening the economy with 16%. In fact, it's statistically tied. 16 and 19 are statistically tied. So you can start to see here, this gives us a good roadmap on issues that we're going to dive to deeper in our second poll. And it also gives you a roadmap to see what are the issues that the candidates will likely be talking about as the campaign rolls on.
Exactly. This first poll gave us a very good idea of a lot of issues, but we will be drilling into them deeper in the next survey. And actually, all the questions and all the data is available on pulseoftheprimary.com. And we'll have more additional stuff as we go and do the next survey down the road. But the main question that a lot of people have on their minds now is, in January, in February, where's the state of the mayor's race? So here's some insights, and how we approached it is 3 parts: awareness, consideration, and horse race. So by awareness, that's really familiarity, what's sometimes called name ID, just simply whether or not they have heard the name of a particular candidate. And we'll talk in just a moment about which candidates were part of this Pulse of the Primary survey. The next question is consideration, whether or not they would definitely, probably, might or might not, probably not, definitely not, consider voting for a particular candidate. That's important when we think about ranked choice, which will be part of this election cycle. And assuming that we probably have a lot of voters who are unfamiliar with some of the candidates, which actually turned out to be the case, we thought it would be valuable to include a short description for each candidate, essentially simulating what a voter might hear or read or see if the candidate were described in the news. So for example, some simple factual statement like Brooklyn Borough President, not necessarily any statement such as liberal or progressive. And then finally, at this moment in time, what we wanted to take a look at was just the horse race. If the election were held today, who would you vote for? We thought it might be too soon to take a look at the ranked choice process, though that is something that we will take a deeper look at later in the future. So with that all in mind, here are the 9 candidates that we looked at during our survey, our first Pulse of the Primary survey. The 9 candidates that we looked at were based on fundraising and press attention at the time of the survey. And those candidates were Eric Adams, Sean Donovan, Catherine Garcia, Zach Eiskell, Ray McGuire, Diane Morales, Scott Stringer, Maya Wiley, and Andrew Yang. And as you can see, we included short descriptions for each one of these, just a factual statement describing them. Even though that won't actually be on the ballot, it's in essence a simulation of the information voters might be exposed to over the next several months as the campaigns play out. So again, these are the 9 that we looked at the time of the survey, though there's 2 caveats I should point out when I say the phrase at the time of the survey. It was conducted, as I said, January 20th through the 25th. That was just in the wake of the election, but it was, the inauguration, but it was also in the wake of Andrew Yang's very large announcement and a lot of media attention around that, social media as well as traditional media. And then in addition, in that time period, since the survey has fielded, Zach Eiskell has actually refiled to run in a different office rather than the mayoral office. So he is included in this survey, but we'll see his numbers in just a moment on the awareness slide. So here is the awareness question. As you can see in the orange box with the orange bars, we'll present you the names of some of the people who might run in the June Democratic primary for mayor. Please indicate if you've heard of this person. And as you can see on the left side of the chart, 84%, or 4 in 5 likely voters, say they have heard of Andrew Yang, just his name. that does make sense when we think about it, not just considering the launch that he had of the campaign, but he's the only candidate of this mix who comes off of a national stage, off of a national platform, literally with his profile raised from the Democratic presidential primary process last year. The next two that we see with a strong showing are Scott Stringer and Eric Adams. 66% aware of Scott Stringer, as well as 60% aware of Eric Adams. Both of them are elected officials, some citywide, some just parts of the city, but they're names that voters are familiar with. In fact, a majority of likely voters are familiar with those names, probably because of their campaigns as well as their existence in the city prior. These other candidates that we see as we go down the list now, Sean Donovan, Maya Wiley, Catherine Garcia, these are candidates that the voters are less familiar with. Same with Ray McGuire, Diane Morales, and finally Zach Eiskell, who, as I mentioned before, has actually refiled at this point to run for a different office. So whereas the first three candidates, a majority of voters are familiar with them, the other candidates that we see on screen, in fact, a majority of voters are not familiar with them. Only 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 voters are simply saying they've heard their name, not even saying whether or not they have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of the candidate or any attributes of them. So before we hop to the horse race slide, what I want to let everybody know is we're going to leave the orange bars on screen here, and we're going to overlay the blue bars looking at the horse race question if the election were held today. Because as you will see, even though we plotted on a different axis, there is a relationship that you'll pick up on. And with that horse race question, we did include the description of each candidate. So if the election for the Democratic primary election for mayor of New York City were held today, and you had to choose from one of the following, which would you vote for? Boosted by strong awareness, we see Yang leads the horse race. 28%, or about 1 in 4 likely Democratic primary voters, say they would vote for Andrew Yang, entrepreneur and former Democratic presidential primary candidate. Again, you can see the blue descriptions below each candidate name. Those are, again, examples of how they might be described in the news, as we've seen in our review. Right next to that, we see Scott Stringer and Eric Adams, or rather I should say Eric Adams and Scott Stringer, 17% for Adams and 13% for Scott Stringer. Those two are statistically tied, and as you can see in the orange bars behind, majority of voters were familiar with those candidates. So it's a toss-up there, and then as we walk down the list here, Sean Donovan and Maya Wiley with 8%, and then Catherine Garcia, Ray McGuire, Diane Morales with 2%, Zach Eiskell with 1%. And then importantly, when we get all the way to the end of the chart here, we see the 19% who volunteered or told us when we presented the choice to them that they are undecided or don't know. And with this question, there's 2 things that are important to note. We did encourage a response here because we did tell them to choose from one of the following, and we included these descriptions, but we did actually include the undecided.
You know, Adam, there are a couple of interesting things here on this slide for me, and they refers to both Stringer and Adams. You know, Stringer and Adams are 2 major elected officials in New York City. They're quality candidates with strong experience in government. They've been around a long, long time, been on the ballot many, many times before. And that's probably why their familiarity is a notch higher than the rest of these folks. And Scott Stringer is a citywide elected official, and Eric Adams is a borough-wide elected official in New York City. So again, it doesn't surprise me there that Stringer would have maybe a tick higher name recognition than Adams would. And as you said, Yang is the highest, but and you've also mentioned that he's the only national figure. But I'll tell you what, these numbers for Adams and Stringer, 13% for Stringer, 17% for Adams, I think that this is their base. I think this is their minimum vote. Voters know who these people are. They may have seen them at an event. They may be familiar with their work. They have been hearing their names in many cases for many, many years. So there's a general sense of credibility around these 2 candidates in particular. So as the election rolls on, I think that this is their floor. And they have nowhere to go but up. And I'll mention name ID for all of these candidates is almost certainly going to be going up as we move through this campaign season. The candidates are yet to hit the airwaves. They've yet to boost their credentials. They haven't been attacking any other opponents. They have not had volunteers calling your home at night. They have not been in your mailboxes yet with the direct mail. So there's still a full campaign to run here. We're only really in the second or third inning of a baseball game. We got to get to 9 innings before this game is over. The other thing I'd mention is that elected officials, labor unions, the clergy, civic associations, they're only now beginning to endorse their candidates. And thus, while one endorsement doesn't make or break a campaign, it does help. It does help move the needle in name recognition. It does help move the needle in terms of people starting to figure out who they support and who they don't support. And the last piece is, as we sit today, which is February 12th, 2021, the Stringer and Adams have huge monetary advantage over most of these other candidates. And while this data doesn't speak to this issue, based on my experience, I think that the campaigns have a lot of room to grow based on their dollars in the bank. And just to give you a sense, as of the January 15th finance filing, Adams had $6.8 million on hand, Stringer had $5.8 million on hand, and McGuire had $3.7 million on hand. So you can see the top three there and the big discrepancy between the top two and the third in terms of dollars. Now, they will all continue to raise money, so those numbers will go up. But again, it's a huge advantage to have such a massive war chest on hand at this stage in the campaign.
So what we'll go forward and take a look at is the consideration question, because this particular question is about if the election were held today and you had to choose from one, but in fact, the election is going to be a ranked choice election. And as George said, it's early on, and a lot of folks are unfamiliar with a lot of the candidates. So the question we asked is, how likely are you to consider voting for this candidate? Definitely would vote for the candidate, probably would vote for. Those are the bars you see to the right side in blue. We included a might or might not choice, which is not visualized in this particular chart, but to the left side of the chart, you'll see in orange those who say definitely would not consider voting for this candidate or probably would not consider voting for this candidate. So there's several candidates who perform well once voters were aided with descriptions of them. Again, they'll straightforward sort of just the facts. Eric Adams, Brooklyn Borough President, since most were unfamiliar with these candidates.
Yeah, and Adam, I'm surprised how Ray McGuire performs here. And I'm guessing that's probably a combination of his low name recognition, which I believe was at 25%, and the label that we gave him as finance executive. Now let's just talk about that for a second. We scoured these candidates' profiles, their websites, how they're presenting themselves. And there's no doubt that finance executive is a major part of Ray McGuire's bio. And it's not 10 years ago, an Occupy Wall Street movement doesn't exist, at least in the way that it did then. But we know anecdotally that Wall Street's not viewed in a positive light. So, it makes sense that perhaps when given a label as a finance executive and with such low name recognition, you would see numbers like this, 32 and 22, won't consider and will consider. But it also means that it's gonna take a lot of work and a lot of resources for him to move these numbers back into alignment with his peers, as you can see on the chart above.
So going ahead, actually, we're going to take a step away from looking at the individual candidates, and we're going to look at attributes, not necessarily associated with any particular candidate. So the question you see on the screen in the box, voters often consider a variety of attributes when evaluating different candidates for mayor. Thinking about the upcoming election for NYC mayor, how important is the following attribute when you consider a potential mayoral candidate? You can see in the dark blue boxes, or in the dark blue bars, we are visualizing the extremely important, and just next to that is the very important. So the top priorities in terms of the attributes that they're looking for is a detailed plan on an issue you care about. 47% of voters say that is extremely important. There's 87% who say it's extremely or very important. And not far behind is having a broad plan on many issues. 40% extremely important, as well as 41% very important. So 81% as the combined extremely plus very. And not far behind from there is proven experience in government/public sector. 34% in the extremely important, as well as 38% in the very important. So that's 72% in the extremely and very important, the three that you see in the orange box. It's a sharp difference, though, from what we see in the items just below the orange box. You can see proven experience in business/private sector only has 16% who say extremely important. That's half when we compare it to the proven experience in government or public sector. And also, as we look down and see the someone who has held elected office before, also 15% in the extremely important, which is half of what we saw with the government and public sector experience. So the voters are in fact distinguishing between government and public sector and elected office, merely being a politician, versus experience in government and public sector governing.
You know, it's been pretty clear to us in and around government for some time that likely voters are looking for a problem-solving mayor. I don't think they're looking for someone whose solution to all problems is to address one macro issue, like, for example, address income inequality. And when you do that, you'll solve for all these other issues that come along. I read this as New Yorkers pushing back against an ideologically driven mayor like Bill de Blasio. New Yorkers aren't looking for a visionary mayor. They're looking for a roll up the sleeves type mayor. They're not looking for a Barack Obama type candidate. They're looking for a Joe Biden type candidate, someone who can point to many, many, many years in government service and be able to demonstrate an ability to solve problems with well thought out plans. You know, for the average voter, it's not too much to ask for a mayor who can walk and chew gum at the same time. New Yorkers are saying, what are you going to do about crime? Why, you know, why is there homeless issue? Why hasn't that been addressed? You know, the sort of basic quality of life issues. Why aren't the streets cleaner? Why aren't the parks open and in better condition? You know, basic government work. And to circle back to my opening remarks, it's not one challenge that the next mayor faces, it's all of these challenges. So I'm looking at this and what the data is telling us, they want a back to basics mayor. They want a nuts and bolts mayor. They want someone with government experience, not business experience. And it doesn't even have to be elected experience, as Adam said earlier. But let's also take a look down at the bottom of the chart. I find this interesting. The demographic traits. You know, today we've got a female vice president who's Black and Indian. We had Barack Obama, who was elected president 12 years ago. In New York, we had a Black mayor who was elected in around 1990, approximately 1990. So I think that the data supports what we see in the street, which is New Yorkers don't care what your gender is, where you're from, what your race or ethnicity is. They just want someone who's going to get the job done.
Exactly. So moving forward, we're going to take a look at ranked choice voting. With ranked choice voting, it's going to be a different process than what has been in the past. So it's a different process in terms of how the votes are actually cast, since voters will be able to choose a first choice, a second choice, a third choice, a fourth choice. It's not just merely a difference in how they return their ballot, like mail elections. And then in terms of the vote distribution and the new totals, it's a different process for how the votes are counted and tabulated and how the winner is ultimately determined, since a winner will need 50% or more of the vote in order to win. So we did not actually present this information to the voters, but I think perhaps we should have, because what we saw when we asked in the next election, New Yorkers will use a new system called ranked choice voting. How much have you heard, read, or seen recently about ranked choice voting? The answer was overwhelmingly that they did not hear a lot. Only 12% said that they had heard a lot about ranked choice voting. And by contrast, 88% had not heard a lot. In fact, we had 1 in 3 who said they've heard nothing at all. This is really important because while we focus today mostly on the mayor's race, ranked choice voting is going to be not only in the mayor's race, but other races as well. So this is one thing we're going to be keeping our eyes on over the course of the Pulse of the Primary series.
That's right. The ranked choice voting is definitely an important issue and something we're going to track over the course, as Adam said. We'll probably also want to look at other issues and inspect them closer, like, for example, how do New Yorkers feel that the vaccine rollout went? We might even ask them to rank, not just share their most important issues, but rank their issues perhaps in order of importance so we can get a deeper level dive there. And of course, we're going to keep an eye on the candidates. We want to see if Yang continues with these high level numbers. We want to see if any other candidates increase over the course of the campaign, and how does that all shake out as it relates to ranked choice voting. For you, you should keep an eye out on March 15th, 2021. That'll be the date that the next time the candidates have to report how much money they have raised and how much money they have on hand. It'll be a make or break moment for a few of these candidates, particularly those like Morales and Garcia, whose fundraising dollars do not keep up with the major candidates in the race. Until then, you should be able to keep an eye on what we've been doing on pulseoftheprimary.com. You can sign up for updates there, and we'll send future results and insights direct to your inbox. And you could also reach out to us if you have any questions. Feel free. Thanks so much for having us. Take care.